things. Number one, sort of gives the industry a social license and gives consumers the confidence that there are protections being put in place. Then number two, I mean, it can actually make a tangible impact on the emissions. Now, the oil and gas industry likes to say, the American Petroleum Industry, the American Petroleum Institute, the broad industry group, has a voluntary program. But they don't even track how much emissions are dropping. And so that's why most people say that some sort of federal regulation is important.
What happens next with this methane rule? Do we expect it to get implemented? Will it be stuck in courts? I mean, this is one of those regulations where it's published, there's a period of public comment, and then it can be implemented after that. But where is this heading?
Right, so we're just at the very beginning of a long regulatory slog. And so this was actually very late in the process. We're almost to 2020, and we're just now seeing the proposal of this regulatory rollback. So we have several months of review and public comment, and then there'll be a final rule. And it remains to be seen whether or not the administration will sort of tact a little bit back to the center and do something that is seen more as a middle ground, or whether they will continue with the most aggressive rollback, which is what they have done. I want to quickly say that the administration's argument here is that another environmental regulation at the EPA issued in 2012 inadvertently cuts down on emissions of methane. So they think that is enough, so do some oil companies. But that is not a direct regulation on methane, and that's what's being repealed right now.
I think that's a regulation that deals with volatile organic chemicals.
Correct. The VOC
That would kind of sideways regulate methane, but not directly.
And the irony is, I covered that regulation that the Obama administration issued. At the time, Obama touted it as saying it would reduce methane emissions up to 95%. So one could see why there could be an argument that, well, why do we need a direct regulation on methane? The reason why is somewhat of a legal detailed one, which is that regulation for new oil and gas wells is the legal precedent to eventually do one applying to existing oil and gas wells. That's hundreds of thousands of wells across the country.
We're speaking to Amy Bernard, who covers energy and climate for Axios. Now, this has some things in common with another recent regulatory rollback, and that has to do with auto emission standards. Where does that stand right now?
This one might be even more controversial and high profile than the methane one. President Trump has tweeted about it a couple of times. So what's going on here is that the auto companies fuel efficiency figures that Obama was issuing toward the end of his administration. And it's a little bit of be careful what you ask for situation, because the auto companies asked for that. And then Trump went ahead and proposed to freeze the standards outright, and also revoke a waiver that California has that allows it legally to issue more aggressive standards.
That's what we mean when we talk about California emissions.
Exactly. And of course, many people say, however, California is sort of a postcard from the future of the United States, for better or worse, a lot of people would argue. And so we're seeing a bit of a mess here from the legal and regulatory political situation. You had just recently the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the most powerful lobby group for business here in Washington, publicly say that they don't agree with what the Trump administration is doing on these standards. And that is perhaps, I think, the first time we've seen that in a public way under the Trump administration.
So what's the administration's rationale for rolling back the auto standards?
They say they have one sort of strange argument, which is that the rule will help cars be safer, in that it won't require as much turnover, and that it'll somehow save lives. Now, there's been a lot of scrutiny on that sort of allegation, and so I think the positions that they're siding with are almost very few auto companies, and it's actually a lot of sort of more ideological, very free market conservative groups that they're siding with. And although I don't think President Trump feels strongly on this issue personally, I think he's surrounding himself with people that have those positions, and that's why we're saying that.
I'm confused. How would not updating the auto emission standards, or perhaps rolling them back, make us safer on the roads. What's the link as they describe it?
Yeah, so it's a little bit sort of a few dots disconnected, right? So they say that if you don't, because having these increased fuel standards, it forces the auto companies to try to make the cars lighter and more fuel efficient, and then lighter cars are some say more difficult to withstand in a car crash. And if you don't have to continue to buy new cars, that the standards would require you to buy new cars that are more fuel efficient and lighter and not as safe. And so that's their argument. It is a little bit murky, and I'm not the only one who said that. Independent experts really raised some eyebrows about that as well.
That also connected to automakers with more fuel efficient and not try to make cars safer, everything one and not everything.
Right, and no automaker has ever said that our car won't be safe if we have the fuel efficiency standards of starting out. What's the issue is complexity, and that is a very legitimate should encourage the administration to do a slight rewrite of this standard, but not a complete freezing, which is what the administration is doing.
Now, this month, the UN is going to have a summit on climate change. The week of that summit, we'll be doing a special series on climate change that we are calling No Plan B. Preview the UN summit for us. Do you think to happen, or is this just another one of those where everybody says the world must get on board and do something about climate change, and we are united, and then nothing happens?
I would probably put my money on the latter. Unfortunately, there's so many of these climate conferences, and I'm planning to be there in New York. The United Nations also holds an annual climate conference in different countries each year. In December and so forth. To some climate happening, because actually 2020 is the really big year when countries are expected to come to the table with new aggressive commitments to meet the Paris climate agreement from 2015. So December 23rd is the big day. What you're going to see UN Secretary calling on countries to put down some sort of symbolic ambition to increase ambition in 2020. But I think we're going to hear a lot of words and not a lot of the U.S. administration is definitely going to have a presence. They have had a presence at the last couple of UN conferences. From what I understand and what the media, what we and others have reported, is that President Trump personally will not be giving a speech. Now, as you said at the beginning, that can definitely change. Trump is a very unpredictable president. But from what I understand, the EPA administrator is likely to be the public face of the administration. And what we're likely to hear is that the United States has reduced emissions more than any other country. To whether or not that's accurate, but that'll be their message.
Amy Harder covers energy and climate for Axios. Amy, thanks very much for making time for us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
When we come back, we'll meet someone who used to run one of the world's biggest oil companies. He says it's up to the energy sector to curb global warming before it's too late. I'm Joshua Johnson. You're listening to 1A from WAMU and NPR.
90.9 WHYY, your NPR member station. From toxic water to toxic politics, no question is off the table. Have your pressing questions answered by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy Wednesday night on Ask Governor Murphy, live streaming tomorrow night at 7, WHYY.org. Featuring certified reconditioned with new with no dings, dents, or scratches that come with 6 months, 6,000-mile bumper-to-bumper warranty and lifetime engine guarantees. CarSense.com. It's car sensational. And the University of Pennsylvania's Center for Weight and Eating Disorders. Are you interested in long-term weight loss? You may be eligible for a research study offered by Penn Center for Weight and Eating Disorders. This 18-month research study combines diet and activity counseling with a weight loss medication. For more information and to see if you meet the research study requirements, the number is 215-573-7403. That's 215-573-7403. In the rural United States, ambulance services can no longer be guaranteed.
We've gotten a service for free, and it does not look like in the very near future that is going to continue.
How rural communities can adapt to continue getting the emergency medical services they need. That's next time on The Takeaway from WNYC and PRI. Weekdays from noon to 1 on WHYY.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from T. Rowe Price, offering a strategic investing approach that examines investment opportunities firsthand. Institutions, advisors, employers, and individuals choose T. Rowe Price. T. Rowe Price. Invest with confidence. And from you, offering a personalized weight loss program based on a cognitive behavioral approach, with the goal of losing weight and keeping it off for good. Learn more at noom.com.
This is 1A. I'm Joshua Johnson. More than 2 decades ago, John Brown, formerly the CEO of the oil and gas giant BP, spoke at Stanford University.
It's always marvelous to come back to Stanford, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here to speak to you today on a subject which I believe is of the utmost importance.
Brown acknowledged for the first time the link between the fossil fuel industry, his industry, and global warming.
It would be unwise and potentially dangerous to ignore the mounting concern. The time to consider the policy dimensions of climate change is not when the link between greenhouse gases and climate change is conclusively proven, but when the possibility cannot be discounted and is taken seriously by the society of which we're part.
That speech caused the industry's trade group, the American Petroleum Institute, to say that Lord Brown had, quote, left the church. It also won him and BP accolades from environmentalists and activists. Accolades that ended in 2010 when the Deepwater Horizon disaster became the largest maritime oil spill in the industry's history. But by that time, he had already been forced out of BP after a British tabloid outed him as gay. Today, he is the chairman of the Crick Institute, a biomedical research facility in London. He is the Baron of Mattingly, hence Lord Brown. And he's the author of 5 books, the latest of which is called Make, Think, Imagine: Engineering the Future of Civilization. John Brown joins us now from NPR in New York. Lord Brown, welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
We'd also love to hear from you, too, your questions for John Brown, or your questions or thoughts about the future of engineering, especially as it relates to the energy industry and fighting climate change, or really any of the challenges that humanity will face in the decades to come. Comment on our Facebook page, tweet us at 1A, or email 1A@WAMU.org. Before we dive into your book, I'd love to get your thoughts on what we just discussed with Amy Harder of Axios, a number of big recent moves from the Trump administration with regard to climate change policy. What's your take on these changes?
These are bad moves. We do need to limit the amount of methane which is coming out of oil and gas production. And indeed, the industry had been and is trying to just do that, but we need to do much more of it. And I think comments by small companies should not be considered as the important area to change policy here. It's a very important thing. So I do think that we need to continue to do this. It's got to be done, in that case, voluntarily. Actually, it's a way of also increasing revenue, because if you can capture the methane, you can probably sell it. I think that's very important. We should carry on.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the current CEO of BP America, Susan Dio, said that regulating methane is the, quote, right thing to do for the planet and for the industry, unquote. It's interesting, and I don't know if you see it this way, but it's interesting to hear companies saying that they would be happy with less regulation.
Well, I think that there's a...
Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I said it backwards. The companies would be happy with more regulation, I meant to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think companies recognize that in order to be part of society, they need to do the right thing. And making sure everybody does the right thing means having regulations and laws to enforce what is going on. Otherwise, I think those who wish to do what's good for society can be undone by those who take advantage of the others.
One quick question about this, and then we'll talk about your book. Kay Blair asks, How can the president get away with ignoring the consequences of fossil fuel exploitation and the climate crisis generally? John, I'm not asking you to get inside the president's head, but I wonder how you see the role of business in terms of letting the president, as Kay Blair put it, get away with the consequences of climate change.
Well, business can deliver things, and I think that is a very important point never to forget. So they are exposed to stakeholders, to clients, customers, other governments around the world, investors, and I think more and more people want business to limit the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted. And they want to see plans, and they want to see actions, and they want to see the measurable outcomes. I think measurable outcomes are critical here. So certainly in the oil and gas industry, I think broadly investors are not happy to invest in companies that will not come up with appropriate plans to reduce their impact on the environment. And I think we will see more and more of that as people begin to become more aggressive in this area.
By the way, you mentioned that companies could capture methane and sell it. What would they be selling it for?
As fuel, because methane is natural gas.
Let's talk about your book now, Make, Think, Imagine. In it, you write, quote, "Energy is the central pillar of the human story, and throughout history, access to it has been essential for every single forward step," unquote. The book really focuses on the potential of engineering to help us lean into the problems that humanity faces and address them. We asked our listeners how they were engineering some solutions to the climate change crisis. And here's a quick mashup of some of what they left in our inbox.
Hi, this is Brian.
Hi, this is Claire Carver from Big Table Farm.
I'm Tony DeVico, calling from San Diego, California.
I run a small startup called E-Bike Cargo Products, and we are creating ways for people to live by bicycle.
We did what we felt was a way to move the ball forward for climate change by not burning our burn piles. We carbonized the biomass on our property instead of doing an open burn.
Our company, Hydrogen On Demand Professionals, has an innovative breakthrough technology that uses a small amount of hydrogen to enhance the efficiency of diesel engine combustion.
Technology has the ability to actually change the way a lot of people look at transportation.
Well, thank you, Brian and Claire and Tony, for sharing your stories with us. John, I wonder where you see this industry going from here. We heard one solution that involves recycling, essentially, carbonizing dead plants, two that involve transportation, electric bicycles, and adding hydrogen to diesel engines. Fossil fuels are non-renewable. They are fated to go away. This is an industry that is destined to die. So where does it go? Does it evolve, or does it go the way of the dinosaur?
Let me say, I think there's a myriad of actions that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Let me pick just a few key points. First is that we can't switch off fossil fuels very quickly. After all, in the world, they create 85% of the energy we now use across the board. So while we all want to reduce fossil fuels, it will take time to replace this extraordinary source. Secondly, we have all the technologies today, the engineered solutions today, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We can do it, whether it's capturing carbon, storing it, capturing carbon and using it, whether it's better and bigger application of renewables, whether it's battery storage, the list goes on. The problem at the moment is a lot of it's very expensive, but the more we do, as we've seen with, for example, solar, the more you do of something, the cheaper it becomes. So my third point is what we actually therefore need is an incentive to force people to begin to change, to capture carbon, to store carbon, and do these sorts of things. And that means having a tax on carbon. And that is probably the single most important thing we need to get done if we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we don't, I think we will continue to increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere.
Who or what do you think is the biggest factor standing in the way of making that happen?
I think it's the public generally, it's all of us. I think until we see present danger, we're very reluctant to force our politicians to move. So we're beginning to see a bit of that now. There's a much greater volatility in the weather, and it's never completely sure whether that is connected to climate change, but there's a reasonable basis to say it might be. People are concerned, more floods, more storms, very high temperatures in places where you wouldn't expect it, at the poles, or even actually in the south of France, where the temperature was, I think, 10 degrees centigrade higher than normal over the summer. And early hurricanes, these sorts of things. So people say something is happening, you need to do something about it. So maybe that will begin to catalyze. I do think it is very difficult to lecture people to say, you really should do this to save the future. Because they say, well, what about today?
We're speaking to the former CEO of BP, John Brown, who's worked with the company from 1995 to 2007, currently the chairman of the Crick Institute. His new book is called Make, Think, Imagine, Engineering the Future of Civilization. We welcome your questions and thoughts for Lord Brown, 1a@wamu.org. What about the industry itself? I don't think a lot of people really trust the fossil fuel industry. We need the fossil fuel industry to do right. But if you just kind of ask the average person, so how much trust do you put in Chevron or ExxonMobil or BP or Sunoco? I don't think there's going to be very much. You've had to deal with public relations challenges, or at least from having been in the industry, how difficult it can be. People hear the name BP and many of them think oil spill. That was after your tenure there, but many of them think about seagulls covered in tar and so forth. What's it going to take for the industry to reform its image?
This industry is just a more heightened example of business generally. Seems to me business can only gain trust by first outlining what it's going to do and reporting back that it is actually doing it, and to take into account all stakeholder views. I see the Business Council's been doing just that. They've actually realized that stakeholders are important people to keep the legitimacy of business alive and to give it a license to operate. So it seems to me dialogue, discussion, and really saying what you're going to do and really delivering on that is very important. Not setting out targets which are so elastic and so elusive that you can do